How did a random voicemail make you realize your parents buried the wrong child? The voicemail came through while I was ordering coffee, a Montana area code I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it. The voice that played back was quiet, uncertain, male. He said my full name, including the middle name I never used, then paused like he was gathering courage. I know this sounds insane, but I think you're my brother. I remember the tree house with the yellow door. I remember the action figure you called Captain Rex. I remember Dad's song about the thunder. Another pause, then. My name is Ian. Please call me back. The message ended. I stood frozen at the pickup counter while the barista called my name 3 times. Ian was my twin brother. Ian drowned 21 years ago when we were both 8 years old. My parents buried him in a cemetery upstate, and I'd visited his grave every birthday since. But this man knew details nobody else would know. I replayed the message 4 times in my car. The treehouse did have a yellow door that Dad painted one weekend. The action figure wasn't red like most people would assume. It was blue with silver trim, and I'd named it Captain Rex when I was 5. The song our father sang wasn't a famous lullaby. It was something he'd made up about thunder rolling across mountains. These weren't facts anyone could find online or guess randomly. I called the number back immediately. Voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me, that I needed to understand what was happening. My hands shook as I started the car. The logical part of my brain said this was a scam, but scammers don't research childhood toy names. They don't know about custom songs your father invented. I drove home and pulled out the box I kept in my closet, the one with old photos, found the picture of Ian and me at age 7, identical dark hair and identical crooked smiles. Stared at his face until it blurred. That evening, I called my mother Claire and asked her to walk me through what happened the day Ian died. She asked why I was bringing this up now. I said I'd been thinking about Ian lately. She sighed that deep, tired sigh she always used when discussing this, recited the story I'd heard countless times. Summer vacation at the lake house, hot afternoon. Ian wanted to swim, but Mom said wait. Mom went inside to make lunch. Came back 20 minutes later and saw Ian floating near the dock. Dad pulled him out, tried CPR, nothing worked. They buried him near where Grandma lived because Grandma insisted. Mom's voice cracked like it always did. I asked which cemetery specifically. She said Riverside Memorial Gardens, like always. But this time I noticed the tiny hesitation before she answered. A pause I'd never caught before. I told her I'd gotten a strange phone call. Didn't mention Ian yet. Just said someone called asking about our family. Mom said probably a scam and to ignore it. We hung up. I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about that hesitation in my mother's voice. The next morning, I called Riverside Memorial Gardens and spoke to a records clerk named Phyllis. Asked about Ian Brennan, buried there in August 2003. Phyllis searched her database, asked me to spell the name 3 different ways, searched again, told me there was no record of that burial. I said my parents told me he was buried there. Phyllis said their records went back 50 years, all digitized, nothing missing. If my brother was buried there, he'd be in the system. He wasn't. I thanked her and hung up. Stared at my phone. My parents had been taking me to visit a grave for 21 years. Either they'd lied about which cemetery, or there was no grave at all. I called my father, David. He was at his office, sounded distracted. I asked about the cemetery. He confirmed Riverside Memorial Gardens. I told him I'd just called and they had no record. Long silence. Then he said, records get lost sometimes. He'd look into it. Had to go. Hung up fast. The man who claimed to be Ian called back that afternoon. I was at my apartment. Had left work early because I couldn't focus. Grabbed the phone on the first ring. This is Nathan. His voice came through clearer this time, less shaky. Thank you for calling back. I know this is impossible to believe. I cut him off. Tell me something only Ian would know. Silence for 3 seconds, then. You had a birthmark shaped like a comma on your left shoulder blade. You were scared of the dark, so I'd stay awake until you fell asleep. You wanted to be an astronaut. On our 8th birthday, we got matching bikes with blue streamers and we rode them down the hill behind the house even though Mom said not to. My throat closed. Those details were correct, all of them. I whispered, "Who are you really?" He said, "I'm your brother. I didn't drown. I don't know what you were told, but I've been alive this whole time." Ian told me his story in fragments, voice breaking over the phone. He said he remembered being at the lake house, remembered Mom and Dad arguing about something, remembered a woman showing up, someone he didn't recognize. Then everything went dark, and when he woke up he was in a car with strangers. They told him his name was Ian Sutton now, that his old family didn't want him anymore. He was 8 years old. He believed them. They moved to Montana, raised him as their son. he had memories of before, but they were hazy, and he'd been told they were just dreams. Then 3 months ago, Ian's adoptive mother died. While cleaning out her belongings, Ian found a folder hidden in the attic. Inside were old newspaper clippings about a missing child case from 2003, a little boy who disappeared from a lake house in New York. The boy's name was Ian Brennan. The photo in the article looked exactly like Ian as a child. That's when he started searching. I asked why he waited 3 months to contact me. Ian said he didn't believe it at first, thought it was a coincidence, a mistake, but he kept finding more evidence. Found his adoptive parents' bank records showing large cash withdrawals around the time he arrived. Found emails referencing a private adoption that was never finalized legally. He said his adoptive father disappeared right after his adoptive mother's funeral, hasn't been seen since. He tracked down old property records and found our parents' names, found me through social media, said he almost called a dozen times but was terrified I'd think he was crazy. I told him I'd been visiting his grave since I was 8 years old. He went quiet, then asked, "What's on the headstone?" I said, "Ian Brennan, beloved son and brother, 1995 to 2003. He whispered, "But I'm not dead." I said I was starting to realize that. We agreed to meet. He'd drive to New York. Would take him 2 days. I'd wait. I drove straight to my parents' house, didn't call first. Let myself in with my key. Found them in the living room, sitting close together on the couch like they'd been expecting me. Mom stood up when she saw me. "Nathan, honey, you can't just show up without calling." I said, "I talked to him, to Ian. He told me everything." The color drained from Dad's face. Mom shook her head fast. "That's not Ian. Ian is dead. This is someone trying to hurt our family." I asked who was buried in the grave I'd been visiting. Mom said, "Your brother." I said, "Which cemetery is he buried in?" Mom blinked. "Riverside Memorial." I said, "They have no record of him." Dad stood up now. Said records were wrong sometimes. Said we'd go there together and sort it out. I asked point blank, "Did you bury anyone at all? Or have I been leaving flowers at an empty grave for 21 years? The silence that followed told me everything. Mom started crying. Not the gentle tears she usually shed when discussing Ian, but harsh, desperate sobs. Dad put his arm around her, but his eyes stayed on me, calculating something. Finally he said, "You need to sit down. This is more complicated than you understand." I stayed standing. He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was stressed. Said Ian didn't drown. Said something happened at the lake house, something they couldn't tell anyone about. Said they made choices they weren't proud of, but thought were necessary at the time. Mom was shaking now, crying so hard she could barely breathe. I demanded they tell me the truth, all of it, right now. Dad looked at Mom. She nodded slightly. He said, "We need to call our lawyer first." That's when I knew whatever they were hiding was worse than I'd imagined. I left without another word, drove back to my apartment and called Ian, told him my parents were hiding something major and acting like they needed legal protection before talking. Ian said his adoptive mother's folder had more than just newspaper clippings. Said there were receipts, transaction records, names of people involved in whatever happened. He'd bring everything when he arrived. 2 days later, Ian pulled up to my building. I watched from my window as he got out of his car, saw myself in his movements, his height, his way of walking. When he knocked on my door and I opened it, we both froze. He looked exactly like me. Same face, same hair, same green eyes. But something in his expression was harder, more guarded. We hugged awkwardly, and he came inside carrying a large folder, spread the contents across my kitchen table. What I saw made my stomach drop. The documents showed a network of illegal adoptions spanning multiple states. Names, dates, amounts paid. The Suttons had paid $175,000 for Ian in August 2003. The transaction was facilitated by a woman named Angela Rourke. But there was another transaction in those records, dated 3 weeks earlier, July 2003. Another $175,000 payment from David and Claire Brennan to the same Angela Rourke. For a male child age 8 to be delivered to their lake house address. I stared at the paper. I don't understand. Why would my parents pay for a child when they already had 2 sons? Ian's finger moved down the page to a handwritten note in the margin. It said, "Replacement for NB after incident. Client requested identical twin to maintain family image." The room tilted. Ian was looking at me with something like pity in his eyes. He said, "I don't think you're Nathan Brennan. I think the real Nathan died, and they bought you to replace him." My hands went numb. The paper blurred in front of me. Ian kept talking, voice gentle but relentless. Said the dates proved it. The real Nathan Brennan died in July 2003. My parents bought a replacement child who looked similar enough to pass as their son. Then 3 weeks later, someone took Ian, and my parents reported him missing, but not me. Because if they reported me missing, authorities might discover I wasn't actually their child. They'd purchased me illegally, right before Ian disappeared. They couldn't risk the scrutiny, so they let Ian go and kept the replacement, Nathan, kept me. I whispered, but I remember things. I remember the treehouse and Captain Rex and the song about thunder. Ian said, those memories could have been planted. Or maybe you really were at that house briefly before they finalized everything. 8-year-olds absorb information fast. They could have coached you. I felt like I was dissolving. Every memory I had, every piece of my identity, suddenly suspect. We went to the police station together, asked to speak with someone about a cold case involving child trafficking. Got sent to Detective Garrett Reeves, late 50s, looked like he'd seen everything. We sat in his office, and Ian laid out the evidence, explaining the documents, the timeline, the implications. Garrett listened without interrupting. When he finished, he pulled up the 2003 missing persons report for Ian Brennan, read through it carefully. Then he looked at me. Did your parents ever act strangely around you? Like they were constantly worried you'd remember something you shouldn't? I thought back. Remembered how they'd moved us away from that town when I was 9. Said Dad got a job transfer, but it happened suddenly. Remembered how they never kept photos from before I was 8. Said they'd been lost in a move. Remembered how they discouraged me from trying to contact childhood friends or visit old places. I told Garrett all of it. He opened another file on his computer. Said in 2003, there had been a brief investigation into a drowning at a private lake house. An 8-year-old boy named Nathan Brennan had died. Parents reported it as an accident. Local police investigated but found no signs of foul play. Case closed. The death certificate was filed. 3 weeks later, the same family reported their other son Ian missing. 2 tragedies hitting one family in rapid succession. Authorities focused on finding Ian, but never found him. The family moved away 6 months later. Garrett looked at me. If you're not Nathan Brennan, then who are you? I had no answer. Ian said the documents might have more information about where I came from, who I really was before the Brennans bought me. Garrett said we needed DNA tests immediately. Both of us, plus samples from the Brennans, plus they'd need to exhume the body from whatever grave actually existed to confirm its identity. The DNA results came back 4 days later. Garrett called us both into his office, face grim. He said the test confirmed Ian and I were not biological siblings. We weren't related at all. The body in the grave, which they'd located at a small private cemetery under a false name, was confirmed through dental records to be Nathan Brennan. He died from drowning in July 2003, exactly as the death certificate stated. But the circumstances around his death were now under investigation because drowning in a private lake with no witnesses was suspicious. He looked at me. We ran your DNA through missing persons databases. Got a hit. Your real name is Marcus Kowalski. You disappeared from a parking lot in Pennsylvania in July 2003. You were with your father. Someone grabbed you while he was loading groceries. Your case went cold after 6 months. My real name was Marcus. I wasn't Nathan. I wasn't a Brennan. I was someone else entirely. Garrett showed me photos from my real missing persons case. A picture of 8-year-old me with blonde hair, not dark like it was now. My father's statement describing what I was wearing, what I looked like, how he'd only turned away for 30 seconds. He said, your hair was dyed when the Brennans got you. They made you look more like their dead son. Coached you on family details so you could pass as Nathan to anyone who didn't know them well. I stared at the photo of the blonde child. Tried to find myself in his face. Couldn't. 21 years of being Nathan Brennan had completely erased whoever Marcus Kowalski had been. Ian touched my arm. I'm sorry. I thought you were my brother. I said, so did I. Garrett said he'd located my biological father. His name was Howard Kowalski. He still lived in Pennsylvania. He'd never stopped looking for me. Did I want him to contact him? I couldn't answer. The woman who raised me had buried her real son and replaced him with a stolen child. And now I had to face the father whose child I'd been stolen from. The police arrested Claire and David Brennan the next day, charged them with child trafficking, conspiracy, filing false reports, obstruction of justice. Claire broke during interrogation, confirmed everything, said Nathan had drowned in their lake, an accident, but one that happened because they'd been drinking and not watching the boys carefully. They panicked. Instead of calling authorities and risking an investigation into their negligence, they contacted Angela Rourke, Someone David knew through business connections. Angela said she could help them avoid scandal. She'd provide a replacement child who looked similar enough to pass as Nathan. They'd already lost one son. If they reported Nathan's death honestly, they might lose Ian too when child services investigated. Angela presented it as protecting their surviving child. They paid $175,000. Angela delivered me 3 days later. They spent that time coaching Ian on what to say, making sure he understood his brother had been sick and had to go away, but was back now. Ian was 8. He believed them. But I looked different enough that it created problems. My hair was the wrong color. My mannerisms were off. They dyed my hair, coached me intensely, moved away from anyone who knew the family well, told everyone we needed a fresh start after Nathan's illness. But 3 weeks after they got me, Angela Rourke contacted them again, said Ian was asking too many questions, noticed too many differences, was a liability. Said for another $150,000 Angela would handle the situation. Claire said they refused at first, but Ian kept saying I wasn't his real brother, kept asking where real Nathan went. They were terrified he'd tell someone, so they agreed. Angela took Ian one night while the family was at the lake house, made it look like a kidnapping. The Brennans reported it, played devastated parents, but secretly felt relieved. One son was buried, one was sold, and they had me. The replacement nobody knew wasn't theirs. For 21 years, they maintained the lie. Howard Kowalski arrived 3 days later. Garrett arranged for us to meet at the police station in a private room. I sat there waiting, hands shaking, no idea what to say to a man who was technically my father, but who I didn't remember at all. The door opened. A man in his 50s walked in, thin, with gray streaks and dark hair. His eyes locked on my face and filled with tears immediately. He whispered, "Marcus?" I couldn't speak. He moved closer slowly, like I might disappear if he moved too fast. "I've been looking for you for 21 years, every single day. I never gave up." He showed me photos. Me as a baby, me as a toddler, me at 8 with blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile. Told me stories about who I'd been. Said I loved building things and wanted to be an engineer. Said I was quiet but thoughtful. Said the day I was taken destroyed his entire life. He'd divorced my mother because they couldn't survive the grief together. He'd spent every dollar he had on private investigators. And now here I was, alive, but with no memory of him. I told him I didn't remember being Marcus, that all my memories were of being Nathan Brennan, of a life that turned out to be fabricated. Howard cried harder, said it didn't matter, that he'd take whatever I could give him, that just knowing I was alive was more than he'd hoped for after so many years. But I felt nothing looking at him. He was a stranger. The Brennans, who'd stolen me and buried their real son and sold their other son, felt more like parents than this man who'd actually raised me as a baby. The thought made me sick, but I couldn't change it. Ian at least had memories of his real family, fragments he could hold on to. I had nothing. No memories of being Marcus, no connection to this life I apparently lived before the Brennans erased it. I asked Howard what happened to my mother. He said she'd died 6 years ago. Car accident. The stress of losing me had contributed to her declining mental health. I'd never get to meet her. Another piece of my real life is gone forever. The trial took 8 months to prepare. Both Ian and I had to testify. I had to explain in court how I'd spent 21 years living as someone else's dead child, how I didn't know my real name until a DNA test told me. Ian had to describe being sold because he'd figured out his parents replaced his brother with a stranger. The prosecutor brought in Angela Rourke in handcuffs. She'd been arrested in Florida running a similar operation with other families. She testified against the Brennans in exchange for a lighter sentence, described how they'd contacted her after Nathan drowned, desperate and willing to pay anything to avoid investigation. She'd acquired me from a trafficking ring that specialized in stealing children from parking lots and public places. Said the Brennans knew I was stolen but didn't care as long as I could pass as their son. When the prosecution asked why they'd agreed to let Angela take Ian too, Angela said, because the replacement wasn't perfect, and the real son was asking too many questions. They chose covering their tracks over keeping their actual child. Claire and David Brennan both pleaded guilty to avoid trial. Claire got 12 years. David got 15 because he'd initiated the contact with Angela Rourke. The judge called their actions a profound betrayal of the most basic duties of parenthood, said they'd murdered their son through negligence, purchased a stolen child to cover it up, then sold their surviving son when he became inconvenient. Said their choices destroyed 3 families, the Brennans, the Suttons, who'd raised Ian believing they'd legally adopted him, and the Kowalskis, who'd spent 2 decades searching for me. During sentencing, Claire looked at me in the courtroom gallery and mouthed, "I'm sorry." I looked away. Ian grabbed my hand. He'd lost his real brother and gained a stranger who wore his brother's face for 21 years. I'd lost myself and gained a history I couldn't remember. We were both left with nothing but wreckage. After the trial, Howard asked if I wanted to come to Pennsylvania, see the house where I grew up, meet family members who remembered me. I said I needed time. He understood, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. Ian went back to Montana to settle his adoptive mother's estate and figure out what to do next. We exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch. The detective closed both cases, filed his reports. I went back to my apartment, the one I'd rented as Nathan Brennan, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. Tried to see Marcus in there somewhere. Couldn't find him. A therapist named Dr. Simmons started working with me on identity trauma and recovered memory. She said the brain sometimes protects itself by burying what's too painful to process. Said being ripped from your father at 8 and forced to become someone else would qualify. Said Marcus might still be in there somewhere, buried under 21 years of being Nathan. 6 months after the trial, I drove to Pennsylvania. Howard had sent me dozens of letters, never pushy, just small updates about his life and gentle invitations whenever I was ready. I finally was. He opened the door and immediately started crying, but tried to hide it, tried to be strong for me. The house was small and neat, full of photos of a blonde boy I didn't recognize, but who was apparently me. Howard walked me through each one, telling stories. Here I was at my 5th birthday party. Here I was on my first day of school. Here I was holding a model rocket I'd built. He'd kept my room exactly as it was the day I disappeared. The walls were blue. The bed had a gray comforter with spaceships. Model planes hung from the ceiling. I felt like I was visiting a museum exhibit about someone else's life. Howard watched me carefully, asked if any of it felt familiar. I said no. He nodded, forced a smile, said maybe it would come back eventually. I started visiting Howard once a month. He never pushed, never demanded I call him Dad, never acted hurt when I kept my emotional distance. He just kept showing up with patience and love I didn't know how to return. Meanwhile, Ian and I talked on the phone every week. He'd started therapy too. Said he was working through the trauma of learning he'd been sold by the people who created him. We'd both been merchandise to the Brennans. Different price tags. Same category. One day, Howard showed me old medical records from when I was a child. Blood type, immunizations, a broken arm I'd gotten falling off a bike when I was 6. I stared at the x-ray of that healed fracture, rolled up my left sleeve and looked at my arm. There was a small scar there I'd never thought about. Nathan Brennan didn't have a broken arm story, but Marcus Kowalski did. It was the first concrete proof that I'd existed before the Brennans erased me. 3 years after the trial, Ian called and said he was moving to New York. Found a job in social work helping trafficking victims. Asked if we could get coffee sometimes, even though we weren't actually brothers. I said yes. We met at a cafe downtown and talked for 3 hours about everything we'd been through and how we were trying to heal. He said he'd forgiven the Brennans, not because they deserved it, but because holding on to anger was destroying him. I said I wasn't there yet. He understood. Said healing wasn't linear. We started meeting monthly, building something new that wasn't brotherhood but wasn't nothing either. 2 people connected by the same crime, both trying to figure out who they were after their identities had been stripped away. Howard asked if he could meet Ian. I brought them together at my apartment. Howard thanked Ian for helping uncover the truth. Ian hugged him and said he was sorry for everything my real father had suffered. They both cried, and I stood there feeling disconnected, like I was watching characters in a movie about someone else's life. But slowly, things started shifting. I began remembering small things. The smell of Howard's cologne triggered something, a ghost of recognition. A song on the radio made me cry without knowing why until Howard told me it was one we'd sung together when I was little. I started building models again, something Nathan never did but Marcus loved. The therapist said my brain was finally safe enough to let pieces through. I changed my name legally back to Marcus Kowalski, kept Nathan as a middle name because pretending those 21 years didn't happen felt wrong. I was both people now, learning to integrate instead of choosing. Howard and I got dinner every week. Started building trust slowly. I couldn't call him Dad yet, but I was trying. He said that was enough. Said after 21 years of not knowing if I was alive or dead, having me in any capacity was a miracle he didn't deserve, but was grateful for every day. The boy buried in that grave under a false name was finally moved to a proper cemetery with his real name on the headstone. Nathan Brennan, 1995-2003. Ian and I went to the new burial site together, stood there looking at the name of the boy we'd both been connected to but never really knew. Ian said, "He was my actual brother and I barely remember him, just impressions and feelings." I said, "I wore his life like a costume for 21 years. We left flowers, not for the Brennans, but for Nathan, who died because his parents were neglectful and then been buried in secret so they could cover their mistakes. A child whose death became the first domino in a series of crimes that destroyed multiple lives. He deserved to be remembered as more than just the catalyst for everything that went wrong. He deserved to have existed as himself, not as a problem his parents solved by buying a replacement." 5 years after the voicemail that changed everything, I had coffee with Ian at our usual place. He told me about a man he was helping at work, another trafficking victim trying to rebuild his identity. I told him about a model I'd finished, a detailed replica of the Apollo 11 lunar module that somehow captured both Marcus and Nathan in ways I didn't fully understand, but felt right. Howard joined us, and Ian shook his hand with genuine warmth. They'd built their own relationship. Two men connected through me, but who'd become friends independent of that connection. We sat together talking about normal things like work and weather and weekend plans. From the outside, we probably looked like family, and maybe we were, just not in any traditional sense. We were three people reassembled from the wreckage of crimes we didn't commit, building something new from the broken pieces. It wasn't the life any of us had planned, but it was real, and it was ours, and it was enough. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.